And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is Tom Smith, and I am the director of the Leica Academy and your host for this afternoon's conversation, Leica Conversation. Today's guests are photographer Lynn Johnson and photo editor Elizabeth Krist. Lynn Johnson's long career has often focused on intense and elusive subject matter, vanishing languages, disease, long-term effects of blast force injuries, and universal concepts or topics like water and death. She's received many recognitions and awards for her work, including World Press Photo, Pictures of the Year International, and she's twice been a finalist for a Pulitzer. And as a photo editor, Elizabeth Krist, for so many reasons, is in a league of her own. During her 21 years at National Geographic, she edited more than 4 million images and was responsible for 108 stories. She nurtured many photographers through their very first stories at the Geographic. And today she's a sought-after curator and educator. And as a consultant for many workshops and photography festivals throughout the industry. It's my pleasure to welcome Lynn and Elizabeth to the program.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you so much for being here.
Being here. It's a pleasure.
And Elizabeth, you're coming to us from DC or from New Jersey?
I'm actually in Jersey City.
And
yeah.
Lynn, Pittsburgh or?
Yes. I'm
okay. All right. Well, welcome. I appreciate you both taking the time. You know, we could do a lengthy interview with either one of you individually, but I thought there might be something very unique and a chance to bring you both together to talk about this magical thing that happens between photographers and photo editors that it's so hard to define, but we're going to try to qualify what it is. What are the things that are required to be able to make the kinds of stories that you two have done together? And maybe to start the conversation, can I ask you to go back to when you first met and then we'll get into your first project together?
Sure. Lynn, do you want to start?
I could start, but I don't remember.
Okay.
I think those brain cells are being used for something entirely different now.
Okay. Well, I have a very vivid memory of first meeting Lynn. My memory of meeting Lynn, I was working at the Asia Society back in 1980, 1981, and Lynn came to show her photographs to me. She came with some images from rural China, and my job was to stay in touch with all these photographers who were going back and forth to Asia and be able to sort of pick up stock, you know, whenever we needed to illustrate stories for the magazine. And I remember my reaction very intensely when she came in. I thought, here's a small person like me. That was my reaction, was to, you know, realize that here was another person that I could relate to immediately because she was my size. She was also very quiet. And so we had a really great rapport. We hit it off immediately. And then we stayed in touch through all the years that I was at Fortune magazine when I was working for Alice Rose George and for Michelle McNally. And I think Michelle probably brought Lynn in, right, to work for Fortune. Is that right?
Yes.
So,
I think I was working with Black Star at the time.
Right.
The venerable Howard Chapnick would have called around and said, oh, could you give this young person a chance?
Right.
And, so that whole Time Life family of magazines was kind of opened to doing assignment work. And but I don't think we worked together there.
I think we might have done some kind of story maybe on Pittsburgh because you were based in Pittsburgh, but that's also a very vague memory.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, let me bring you up to, we'll put on the screen your first story, as I understand, your first geographic story together on landmines.
Sure.
Can you talk, Lynn, about you know, both of you are in the, you know, in the photo industry, the idea of working at National Geographic, it's the, I think for photographers, it's the equivalent of when you put it's the Super Bowl. It's when you put an idol on the wall, and I've known some photographers who put other photographers on the wall as goals, as something to shoot for. And you are both have done that. You're in that arena. And I'm wondering, you know, if you could go back to Lynn, when you got this assignment, how it happened, and then also what it feels like to get an assignment from the Geographic.
You know, it's interesting. I think a lot happens behind the scenes that the photographer is never aware of.
That's true.
And that's one of the interesting things about working with Elizabeth is she seems to know everything that's going on in the industry, in the business, as well as there at Geographic.
But I can tell the backstory about this assignment because Lynn was not aware of what happened. The writer Mark Jenkins had proposed this story on landmines, and there were a number of other photographers who were interested in photographing this story, and they were lobbying our director of photography, David Griffin, at the time, because they wanted this story. But David looked at the fact that Lynn had done this other story, a previous story for Geographic on weapons of mass destruction, and she had, you know, covered landmines or researched landmines as part of that story. And so he felt that it was a natural outgrowth that she would be the right person to assign. Plus, you know, her degree of compassion and the way that she's able to, you know, sort of achieve a certain intimacy with people who've gone through these really traumatic experiences. And so I think that's why she received the assignment. But Lynn, you have to tell me what it felt like when David called you and you got that story.
Well, I do think it's important to note what you just said, Elizabeth, which is that every story you do is building on a story in the past. And so all of that kind of memory and experience and research you've done, you do a tremendous amount of research for every story at Geographic. And that's a critical aspect of carrying you to the next project. So I think, you know, getting a phone call from the director of photography or an editor to say, you know, are you interested in this project is, you know, it's never every day. It's always exhilarating because you know you're about to embark on something that will change your life. And it might be in small ways, it might be in large ways, but it's another layer of life experience and another opportunity to share information across the world audience. So it's an extraordinary beginning every time and never to be taken for granted.
Elizabeth and Lynn, if I could ask you, let's deconstruct this story a bit. So we know it came from a writer initially, and then how, take us through the process of how it was created.
Well, as Lynn says, you know, at National Geographic, almost every story, there's an extensive research project. And we were very lucky that at the time, this was back in, I think, 2008, the story was approved. And we had two really exceptional researchers as part of the photo staff who dedicated themselves to doing nothing but research on these larger stories. And so one was Mary McPeak, who's sort of a legendary researcher. The other was David Waddell, and they both did research on this story. And so they helped connect us with a lot of different NGOs. I think we worked with at least 5 or 6 NGOs in these areas. And the thing about this story is that we actually had charted it out that Lynn would go to Cambodia, which is where most of these photographs were taken, and then take another small detour into Thailand to photograph elephants who had been injured by stepping on mines. And then we were going to do an entire second half of the story in Africa. And there were other places we had talked about too. Afghanistan was another possible site. But what happened was we were sort of victim to several different trends at the magazine at the time. One was they were really trying to save money, and the other is that there was this thought that you could tell an entire global story by going to a microcosm version of it. So you could go to one place and cover all of those global issues in one location, and then tell the rest through a map, because there was a map in the story that sort of gave extensive information about other locations. And so because of that, they liked Lynn's pictures so much at the halfway look, which is one thing that we do. And I'll go back into the whole process. Lynn, you can talk about the process, that they just cut off the entire second half of the story and they said, you're ready to publish. We're fine with doing just one location, basically.
I would love two things. Let's go to that picture of the elephant. So Lynn, you could talk a little bit about that. I mean, I think that's something that I might be surprising to people, but then also, what was your reaction to it's ready to publish?
Oh, I mean, extreme disappointment. Because, and I think that's the struggle that actually can impact the relationship between the photographer and the photo editor, is that, the photographer's in the field and we're immersed in all of these super personal stories and witnessing people's trauma and, feeling with every passing day and every passing frame, you feel more and more committed to telling the story of people who suffered, who survived, who, went back into their lives to achieve some sort of, triumph over their pain. And then to find that because of some institutional mandate or budget, that an entire another population of people will not be heard and seen. That is damaging, actually. I mean, because I feel responsible. So I think that's the hard thing for someone like Elizabeth in her position. Yeah. She has to negotiate that middle ground. And in this situation, after photographing where the elephants were being helped, through colleagues I was working with there, we came upon or learned about the Mesa Clinic that was treating the Karen people who were coming across the border. And I met a little boy who had stepped on a landmine when he was herding his animals in the forest. And he allowed us to, he allowed me and the interpreter I was working with to accompany him to the hospital and to spend time with him in the camp where he was living with his brother. And so I was in touch with Elizabeth, said, I have to stay. I cannot come home. Oh. We have to do this. And she, bless her, was an advocate for more time in the field. So I don't think I knew at that point, there was no indication that the second half of the project was not going to happen, but it was.
No, because they didn't make that decision until after. I mean, the other part of the process that we should talk about is that, when Lynn is in the field, she's sending back hard drives. And we had an entire unit of people who would review the images and make sure that there were no technical problems. And before I would even receive the images, and often they would convert them into JPEGs for faster editing. So for instance, for this story, I think there were about 8,300 frames that Lynn shot. And so then when she comes back, we each edit separately, and then we get together and we sort of merge the catalogs. When we're down to, 1,000, 2,000 or something, we'll start editing together over like Skype or something, just remotely. And then when we get down to the last, 50 frames, 30 frames, we'll do a presentation for the top editors, for the rest of the story team. And this picture actually illustrates an interesting point, which is, so when we show that interim look, we had the expectation that we would show it and then everyone on the team would talk about, well, what's missing? What else do we need to do? And then we would launch onto the second half of the story and the field coverage. But of course that didn't happen because they made the executive decision that they liked the pictures, they wanted to go with these pictures, and they wanted to save half the budget essentially too at the same time. So that's when that decision was made, after Lynn was back and they had seen this. But what happened here was that because Lynn went into Thailand to cover that, operation where they were making prosthetics for elephants who had lost their feet, to landmines. She then discovered this clinic, and these two Burmese refugees, I think they were brothers, who came in, and she said to me, I really need to stay and cover this. And I said to her, absolutely, stay. And so she took an extra 5 or 6 days. So then it was up to me, and I have to admit, I'm embarrassed to admit this, that I didn't do this until afterwards. I didn't do this until she came back, to go back to our director of photography, who had changed, by the way, in the interim while Lynn was photographing. And it was Kurt Muchler. And I had to go to him and basically say, I let her stay an extra 6 days. And so, I didn't ask permission, I just let her stay. And so that was probably not, the most wise thing that I ever did in my career, but it worked out,
You have to let someone stay in the field. I mean,
well,
and Kurt is no stranger. Actually, I've worked with Kurt also. He's no stranger to this behavior, I must say. He, one of the projects that Elizabeth and I hope to work on is some material that I actually started in a project with Kurt, project about cannabis, so which we'll talk about later, but you can go down the rabbit hole, as he says.
We can.
Yes,
well,
right.
we're gonna get there, but we'll get to the cannabis story. But one of the things I'd love to touch on with both of you as we move into another project is dispel some myths that people may have about what working for a magazine, but specifically working for National Geographic, what that experience is like. I mean, Elizabeth, for you, I would think, I mentioned at the beginning, 4 million images over 21 years. I would think so much time would be spent just with the images, but it sounds like your role is far more involved with being that conduit between the publication and the artist.
Right. I think most photo editors at National Geographic would agree that we're almost like producers for a story. I mean, we try to go with, starting with everything from the very beginning, whether it's having any input with the photographers assigned, but especially with the research and trying to shape the coverage so that, the photographer is going to the right places to cover when I say right, to the key places to cover really essential situations to tell that story for an audience who might have no familiarity with the subject. Because when you're talking about a worldwide audience, with 38 different languages and, just this mass sort of attention, then you want to be able to distill it down to the key visual situations so that you're sending somebody to the right place and they have the best chance of making the best work to tell those stories. But
Elizabeth, that's a good transition. We're going to look at some layouts of where this story, what the final edit looked like.
Right.
Can you speak to those selections?
Sure, but I'll also say, when we were talking also, Tom, about the role of the photo editors, it's taking it all the way through the end and thinking with the photographer, of course, and with the whole rest of the team. We're working with a text editor, we're working with a writer, we're working with the video people, we're working with the social media people, we're working with the design editor and the researchers very closely, especially, and trying to decide what are the best forms in which each story are going to manifest themselves. Do we do various sort of social media things? Do we do, and maybe this is better talking about the next story. We're going to talk about all the different ways in which they came out. But it's also, the photo editor has a very delicate role in which I want to advocate not only for the photographer, but I have to think about what is the best decision in each case for the story and what is going to benefit the magazine and the publication and the organization that is employing me. And I also want to think about how do I safeguard the interests of the people who actually appear in the stories? The people that Lynn is photographing, she and I are also trying to make sure that we don't in any way violate their trust. So, you're juggling all these different interests, basically, and trying to, you know, do your best for everyone. But of course, when it's somebody like Lynn, you really want to make sure you get her all the resources, especially time, that she needs to create the best work. Because my other role really is to try to get her that next assignment, to make sure this is so successful that they want her to come back and do the next story. So.
Thank you. It's a really great transition into the next story. And I don't know if this was actually your very next project together, but I understand. No. No. How many do you know? How many stories did you actually work on together?
We only did 2, and that's what's so crazy is we had been such close friends since, we had been getting to know each other more and more since 1980. And the landmine story was proposed in 2008 and was published in 2012. That's how long it can take, but it's similar with the next story on death and dying. It's, you know, I think the first proposal I sent in, because I originated the idea, was in 2012, and it wasn't published until April of 2016. So another 4-year evolution of a story.
Wow.
So,
Wow. That may be another myth we're busting here in terms of the amount of time it takes from initial concept research to actually publication. Lynn, could you share a two-part question here? I'm interested to know if this is with your second project with Elizabeth, how the trust you had developed in her as a photo editor affected the way you could dive into this project. And then maybe we'll talk about some of the stories behind a few pictures here.
Well, I think that because the photographer in the field at Geographic is doing a lot of the things that Elizabeth discussed. I mean, you're doing your own research, and then based on that research, you're also searching in the field for the appropriate, the most powerful individuals or places that amplify the story ideas. And, you know, that's quite conceptual, but when you come down to the reality of who is on the other side of your camera and how do you ask that person to trust you, a lot of that is based in, do you trust the person in the office and the institution that you're working for? And I think this is where the friendship and the working relationship is so critical, that for me to be able to say to someone who is going to die or who has come back miraculously from the other side, to trust in the, not just in, you know, me photographing them, spending time, giving their energy, sharing their thoughts and their heart, but also trusting the person who will receive the work and you know, sort of midwife that work through the process. That is a critical relationship.
But of course, it's the same on my end in the sense that I'm contacting many of these people, you know, trying to explain to them exactly what the story is about and, you know, how the work is going to appear. But it all comes down to the fact that I totally trust that when Lynn arrives on their doorstep, that she's not going to violate the trust, because, you know, I'm trying to coax them into agreeing to some very difficult, you know, terms and access. And she's the one who's going to actually go and, you know, they have to be able to trust her or the whole thing falls apart. So, but if I could also, is it possible, Tom, for me to explain how this story, what the story is about?
Absolutely. No, please do. Let's set up the story behind these pictures for sure.
Yeah, it's just a little arcane, and I thought maybe I just should give the background, which is when I initially sent in an idea in 2012, I was working with a science editor, Jamie Shreve, and we had in mind something that had more to do with hospice and the fact that there was a lot of pressure from the medical system to, you know, employ sort of the latest advanced technology to preserve life until the very last second. And this whole idea that, you know, we were trying to put in was this sense that isn't there more value, instead of, you know, expending all of your energy and fighting for time in those last few minutes, to trying to make the time that you have more meaningful? And so we wanted to talk about hospice and that sort of thing. And what happened was it evolved when a science writer, Robin Hennig, was hired, and she had all this research about how it's not so much thinking about death as an on-off switch, but more about a transition. And what is it like to be in that limbo territory when you're kind of on the brink of death? And so it was a much more interesting, I thought. I instantly supported that you know, change in the story idea, because I love that idea that we would be basing it much more on science and research about you know, redefining death, essentially. But then the trick is, how do you make that human? You know, how do you translate something that could be a very abstract scientific idea into the lives of people? And that's why I think Lynn was the perfect person to do this story.
Lynn, let's explain the story behind this particular picture to build on what Elizabeth shared.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, because you're really talking about illustrating the moment in between, the invisible moment and the unimaginable moment, where you are suspended between what we know is life and what we think we know is death. And so it was a question of finding people who had experienced that in some fundamental and unique way. And in this situation, the son of the two folks who are on either side of this gentleman was in a car crash and lost his life, and his organs were donated to multiple people. And so he had this idea of asking everyone who had received any part of this young man's body that now sustained their lives to come to the road where he died. And that is that's a pretty big request. And so the gentleman right there who was standing looking at the camera has the heart of this boy. And what was interesting to me is that the mom, who is herself involved in transplantation and advocating for transplants, she says, no, my son is dead. He has passed on. I am at peace with that. But his dad said, no, my son is still alive. And so, you know, I just kept saying, are you sure he's alive? So we're standing on this road and making this photograph all together. And after this image, Mom stepped away and he pulled me to him and said, put your head there, listen to that heart, and tell me my son is not alive.
And the really also extraordinary thing is, do you know that their son benefited the lives of 76 different donors, because it was not only his major organs, but they were harvesting, you know, skin, tendon,
cornea.
Yeah, I mean, it was really extraordinary. And I think we gathered maybe, I don't know, 10, a dozen or something. And there was a group shot, but this turned out to be the one that really kind of spoke to us.
Continuing that story, Lynn, in terms of how, well, two questions again. Who decided that you needed to go to this spot and that this was on the list as a project, that this needed to be on a part of the whole thing? Who made that decision?
You know, a colleague, another friend and colleague, worked, you know, has a website actually that deals with transplantation. And so when we knew we wanted to deal with that issue, I called him and I said, David, who do you know that we can, you know, talk to about this? And it took us to this family. So, you know, the path can be circuitous, really. And that's why you can do all the research in the world, but when you get in the field,
Right.
You really have to allow yourself to be led by the people that you meet, because they will take you to the scene or the individuals that are going to help you tell the story. And
well, marrying the story with the layout, let's look at some of the diptychs that were a part of this. And Elizabeth, if you can speak to how the digital version of this story compared to what that freedom that gave you. And then Lynn, I'd love to know also a bit more about the stories behind each one of these diptychs we'll look at.
Yeah. So I'll just say that we were very fortunate that with this particular body of work that Lynn was also recording audio with almost everyone that she met because the stories were so powerful. And to hear their voices, I think, is also just so moving. But for the print version, we basically, not only ran the usual sort of story, but also there were 3 sort of spin-off digital features that came out of this. One was about near-death experiences, which is what this diptych refers to. There were, I think, 6 or 7 different diptychs that we ended up selecting, in which each person whose portrait Lynn made was photographed at the site of where they technically died, and then, of course, were later revived. And so that was one outcome. And then there was another much more extensive story, which we'll see in a minute, about the mother of another friend of ours, a colleague of ours, who was dying at home. And we'll talk about that later. And then there was a third in which Lynn was interviewed for a proof of video. It was called Exposure. And that's a feature that National Geographic did at the time, in which they would interview photographers to talk about their experiences in the field. So those were 3 separate digital features that came out of the print story. But these 3 actually did appear in the print version as well. So.
Lynn, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back. I saw on the chat that colleague Stan Alost from Ohio University said, David Lee, the waiting list. So that was the friend who actually helped us find folks for the transplant.
And I would also like to just interject that it's not some woo-woo kind of new agey thing about somebody is still alive if their heart is implanted in somebody else's body, which, you very well may think is true. But the science that we were rooting that situation, and had to do with the fact that they had to keep the body alive, until all the organs could be removed to be given to someone else. So that was the sense in which someone is dead and yet they're alive. So that's the basis of that.
To continue on with all of the aspects of death that you've covered, let's transition to a story of Phyllis B. Andrews. And Lynn, if you could set up how this happened, and we'll share a bit of video.
Well, before we started into the field to do all that kind of 2 1/4 very formal photography, when we were first starting to think about this project, I have some dear friends, Nancy Andrew and her partner, Annie O'Neill, and they were in attendance to her mom, Phyllis, Nancy's mom, because she was entering the last stage of her life. And I said to Nancy, do you think your mom would allow me to document her passing? And she was like, no. She's private. So I said, well, just let me try. So I went to visit, because I think there is nothing you can try to formalize and create a structure around something as ephemeral as dying and that moment in between life and death. But for me, there's nothing. It's so much of it is intellectual. There is nothing more powerful than being in the presence of that actual human condition and the actual relationship that plays out before you. And so that Phyllis said, yes, be here, be present as I pass. And, that is an extraordinary gift. And I think Nancy has confirmed that other people have seen this beautiful video, and that was created at Geographic, and that it's helpful to others. And ultimately, that's my goal, not just to share information, but to actually create something that is going to help people deal with this kind of monumental fear that we carry as human beings. So this is a little video clip where you see Phyllis, you hear her and see her thinking about her passing. And we did a lot of audio, and I feel like this is the place to live in this piece.
Great. We'll take a look at it right now.
I'm not afraid of dying. Sometimes I think dying is a relief. I would rather pass on than to not be able to have any good times. The thing I miss the most is not being able to see the cards and be able to play cards. I miss going to bridge. Can't eat much at times. But that's what the doctor told me I'd be able to do, less and less. And he was right. I can't get out of here.
All right, we'll get you. I'll be your arms, your legs for you, okay? All right, Mom. 1, 2, 3. All right. I think she's in distress of being fully conscious of her body receding. And then the other distress is when she actually can't breathe. You all right, Mom? You know, what is life? Is life simply that you're technically alive? Is that life? Or does a person define what life is for them?
If I lay on my left side, I can feel my heart beating. And, you know, sometimes it's bang, bang, bang. I can feel it vibrating and hear it too. I really don't want to do that.
Thank you. And I want to share with the audience that that was just 2 minutes of a 6-minute piece that there is a link that I would encourage all of you to take a look at after this program to see the full story. Lynn, you mentioned wanting to make images that make a difference and are helpful. And I know that Elizabeth would share that goal with you as well. But I have to ask both of you the personal impact or how your view of death has changed as a result of doing this project.
First of all, can I just say that when you do a project, it is truly a piece of your life. And to have shared that with Nancy and Annie, I think it changed my life. And Elizabeth and I have talked about this because my mom, in the interim, my mom has neared death recently. She, in fact, wanted to stop eating and drinking. And so who did I call to seek help? Annie, Nancy, and Elizabeth, because we had shared this experience. We had talked about death. You know, we had looked at what is the meaning of that place in between. Should we be fearful? what did we learn? And I think that is the very heart of working together. It is being in that sort of grace-filled time that you call on the people you trust. You call on, I call on my partner, I call on my life partner and on my work partner, and my friend partners. And, and those are the people that sustain you. So only when you can do that, can you then go on to the next project, having fully realized the lessons from the prior. So,
Elizabeth, from your perspective, anything you want to share?
Well, I actually was interested in this story because I had been volunteering in hospice. And so I actually ended up volunteering for about 10 years or maybe 11 years in hospice. And so I was already very sort of sucked into that world. And I have to say that it made a huge difference to me to be able to share such an intimate aspect of my life with Lynn. And I think that that just tremendously deepened our relationship, both in working and as friends, to be able to talk about these issues, because it is really true. When you're talking about what is life, what is death, what makes life worth living, why do we want to stick around? You get to know someone in a way that, you would like to carry to the end of your life, basically.
Well, I want to jump to something that I know both of you are very passionate about, and that's diversity in our industry, and specifically want to talk about a Women of Vision project that Elizabeth was the curator and editor for, and Elizabeth, if you could speak to how many years ago was this now that it started? It ran for 3 years as an exhibition. Is that correct?
What happened was that in 2012, Catherine Kane, who is still the director of the museum at National Geographic, had an idea that, she wanted to gather together women who had been doing this groundbreaking work for National Geographic to celebrate the 125th anniversary, which was coming up in 2013. So what ended up happening was I was lucky enough to be able to choose the photographers, and then Catherine was able to sort of put together this huge extravaganza, which ended up going to, I think, 10 different museums and 3 different photo festivals. There were 11 photographers involved, and actually the first museum, it opened in Washington, D.C. at National Geographic in 2013, and believe it or not, it continued to travel until last year. Last year, it was in a museum actually in LA, and so that was the last museum that it's appeared in since then. So
you both have been judges of many photography. You've been jurors for many photography contests, including our upcoming Leica Women's Photo Project, which has a deadline of October 8th. And I wonder, in your experience in judging these contests, so often photographers want to know what it takes, how do they stand out? And can you share some advice on that for people who might submit for this upcoming Leica Women's Photo Project?
Lynn, do you want to start?
Yes, please, because I think you kind of have you have a broader perspective, Elizabeth. I feel like every person who wants to have a voice to communicate with a camera should enter into this experience. And, I'm very honored to be, involved in the Leica Woman Photo Project. And I think that, we want to see more and more women who feel they have value to what they see in their lives and to what they have to say. So pick up a camera. Do not be shy. Do not think you have to be the best. It should really be about as many voices great diversity in voices, ages, wherever you are on the gender spectrum, wherever you are on whatever spectrum you perceive to be your life's path. Tune in, pick up a camera, contribute.
And
So,
Elizabeth, let's do this. I want you to hear your answer, but
Yeah.
Antonia, let's put up, as we listen to Elizabeth's answer on how to stand out when submitting, let's also look at the pictures from Lynn that you selected for the Leica for Women of Vision, and because those images might support. These are images you selected to fit into this exhibition, into the book,
right.
and they may fit into some of the tips you're going to share on how to stand out.
Well, honestly, I just have one or two very practical tips, which is that whether it's for this competition or any other situation in which your work is going to be judged, just make sure you send the strongest work. I mean, I personally favor seeing a body of work in which, you know, you might have a project that you've been working on, but I don't know, honestly, I don't know what the rules are for this competition. If there are particular standards, you know, that people are asking for when you enter. But my advice is do not put in any weak work, because I cannot tell you how many times I'm looking at a set of 10 images and I think, oh, that's pretty good. And I think, oh, that's fantastic. And by the time I get to like 5 or 6 or 8, I'm thinking, oh, that's terrible. Or, you know, maybe there's one just that is really just sort of blows the whole thing. And it's really distressing because one, you know that they probably have stronger work and they just didn't do a great job editing when they entered it. But also for a lot of competitions, and I don't think this is true of this one, a lot of them, you want to front load your strongest images, because a lot of judges will look at the first like 5 and say, okay, they're out. You know, I mean, you don't want to put your weakest ones toward the beginning. Of course you want to end with something really strong, but I would say start with really strong work too. That just comes to my mind, but go ahead.
Practice, you know, you like all of these things come from actually doing them. And so sometimes you need to enter many different competitions or, you know, opportunities for grants. And it may take a dozen or 2 tries to move to the place where your work is fundamentally powerful. So, but do not hesitate, because it has to do with practice. It has to do with doing it over and over and over again. I mean, all of the work you gathered for Women of Vision, these are photographers who have been working years in the field. So it takes time to develop a body of work that has value. And in terms of what you're talking about, Elizabeth, but you know what, it's every time you lift the camera to your eye, that has value. And so I just don't want young people to think that they have to be great before they try to enter something like this, because that's just a muscle. It's just courage. You have to do it. And it will give you courage to do it again, again, and again. And that's when you will succeed.
But I would also say, though, Lynn, that in terms of competitions, I would choose carefully, just in the sense that, you know, many of them charge fees. And I think, you know, what you want to do is you want to enter the competitions in which there are judges that you want to see your work. You know, look carefully, who is judging, and will it benefit you for those people to see your work? And of course, I think it helps to get your work out as much as possible. But if you have limited resources, you don't want to just enter everything, you know?
Well, I'll just share with the audience that we have put a link in the chat window where you can get the full details for the Leica Women Photo Project, and would encourage everyone to check that out. I want to transition us to a current project, Lynn, and I think that both you and Elizabeth have plans to collaborate on this. If we can look at on the project Cannabis Kids, and in that maybe answer some of the audience questions, which is two things. You know, photography is a process of discovery, it sounds like, for both of you. But what have you discovered in this project? And then how do you know when to click the shutter? How do you know when it's a moment? These are audience questions.
Oh my God, that's actually a great question. So first of all, I don't know if anyone can tell, but we don't always agree, Elizabeth.
Right.
She's definitely the more practical one, and I'm definitely just out there sort of like. And so this project about kids and cannabis grew out of a story I did with Kurt Muchler, another fabulous photo editor at Geographic. And it was a sort of a general story about cannabis. And I got to know children who were medically fragile, and their parents very bravely were using cannabis to keep them alive or to help them die without pain. But the 5 or 6 kids that I continued to follow now for 5 or 6 years, they are all still alive. They were supposed to be gone years ago. So it seems to me that this body of work hopefully will find another incarnation. And I asked Elizabeth to work with me on this project. And, also a great writer, Harriet Brown, who is a colleague from Syracuse University. So I think to not give up when you have this vision of something that you believe might have value in the wider world is really important. But you need partners to do that. You know, you need people to support you and to believe in the project, and then to add their area of expertise and their vision as well, because you can just get lost.
But I think that really speaks to the importance of personal projects. And I know a lot of editors feel this way, that, you know, to encourage photographers to try to find something that they are totally passionate about, that they want to get out of bed every morning excited that they're going to go work on this story or this project. And I think that that is what makes a difference to a lot of editors, is when they see the commitment that a photographer has to a particular body of work and how they've been able to you know, feed that into a full-fledged production. You know, it's to see a whole set of images that really are the manifestation of their dedication, and it proves that they can do the work, they can do the research, and they have the dedication to stick to it. I can't say enough about trying to encourage people to you know, both initiate their own personal project and to carry it to term, basically.
And would you say to that point, Elizabeth, that photographers who are interested in working for the Geographic or for similar magazines, that they're better to finish or be in the middle of a project before they bring it to a publication?
I think if you are not someone who is known to the publication, it can help a lot to be almost finished, you know, to be very close to being finished, if not finished. If you're finished, great. You know, you can always bring that around and show that to everyone. It's your calling card. But I think a lot of places are also very interested in seeing something when it's like 2/3 of the way done, and then they can have input in helping you complete it, and they can help fund the completion with their sort of tailor-made advice for their audience.
Lynn, please.
Sorry, Tom, but by the way, if you take it to whoever, magazine, website, and they turn you down, do not listen. Do not give up. Just continue to work until the work matures. And I think that's something that happens when, you know, people envision their life being connected, their creative life being connected to a magazine like Geographic, and then it becomes the only thing they want to do. But there, you know, for everyone who's worked there, there are many, many, many steps of growth and maturation that happen before you actually walk in the door or get an assignment. So those formative years are critical, and doing your personal projects that you're passionate about, be part of that development. So,
but it also doesn't hurt when you're showing the project, and even it can't be published, you know, to ask about, you know, to ask for feedback and to ask why
Yes.
you know, something isn't right for that particular audience, or if there's a direction it could take that might be of more interest to them.
But
All those sorts of things.
those are all great points. And I know both of you spend a good amount of time now mentoring, and we may talk a bit about communities that you have developed, or specifically working with the students at Syracuse University. And also developing programming specifically geared towards female photographers, and figuring out what is needed to help them sustain a career. I'd ask you to share, what are questions that you ask your students to ask themselves in terms of their projects, or whether they're starting or where they could take it? What are key questions they should be asking?
Well, I just ask them, you know, what is it you care about? And, you know, I also advise them to develop some other area of expertise besides photography. You know, if you have a passion for, I don't know, cooking or sports or something, and you become an expert in that, then, you know, that gives you an extra dimension that people are going to call you for, you know, because it's valuable. But I mean, that's one thing, but.
And Lynn, any thoughts?
I just echo that, actually. I think you need to be a fully formed human being, you know, and you need to be educated in a variety of subjects, and it can't just be about the frame and your appetite for the photograph. So, you know, one of the things that I hope to develop a mentoring program at Syracuse University, and we haven't done it for the last few years for this reason and that, but out of that grew an effort that we called Women Focus. And it started actually, I think, when Elizabeth and I were working with the last group of photographers at Syracuse. And it happened to be an all-female class. And I asked them, you know, what are the barriers? Why are there so many women in school studying photography? And when you look at the ranks of women in the business itself, it's, you know, it's just like so small. So they said, you know, we need portfolio reviews. We need portfolio reviews that are for women only. And so we created one. And thanks to Elizabeth and all her great contacts and some of our other colleagues, you know, we created this event, which we hope to replicate at some point in time when we can all physically be together again, and provided over, I think, 100. You gathered like 100 reviewers, right, Elizabeth?
I think it was more like 70 reviewers and 90 some photographers.
90
I think
young photographers.
This was at the museum in DC in conjunction with POY's 75th anniversary. So,
and it was a great success, I think.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. So, but there were also very intimate conversations with people about very sensitive subjects in which women could kind of confide in each other and share their wisdom. So that was great.
And these are programs with that Leica is very interested in supporting, and with you two in particular, whether online or we're going to talk about a narrative workshop that is being taught through Photoville. We're going to give some information about that here in just a moment. But you're also both going to be teaching for the Leica Akademie October 1st through the 4th for a 4-day workshop called Photographing with Intention. What does that mean? What can people expect?
Well, I'm excited because it means we can look at everybody else's work and not talk about us. You know, so.
But that's getting back to the, when do you know when to click, how do you know when to click the shutter?
Oh, right.
So that's all about intention. And if you don't understand your intention for the project, or your intention, you know, that is fundamentally within you as a creative person, then it's difficult to know when to hit the shutter. So I also think sometimes like fate does that for you. You know, that's like, it's another force that can be operating in the universe. So
well, I want to ask you both. You have you're both at a point where people are often coming to you for advice, and you've shared a great deal of advice here. But as we bring to a close and we talk about some of the upcoming programs, what are your concerns about visual storytelling in the current generation? What do you think are the biggest challenges that we face?
Well, I would just worry about people being able to make a living, you know, to be able to put food on the table and pay their rent. And I think that you see a lot of young people really raising these questions. And I think I personally am a great admirer of the people who author the Photo Bill of Rights, because I think even though there's a lot of contention, a lot of controversy, and there are many points, of course, that need to be debated, I think that a lot of those people who had the courage and the foresight to be able to map out some of these issues in an industry that was not serving people in terms of having a full life. You know, I just think that they're at least trying to envision a better future. And I really admire that. And I think it's a great starting point to be able to talk about it and to have institutions, publications, and freelance photographers sharing a lot of their ideals about what kind of a life we can make together in this industry, whether it's photography, journalism.
Lynn, what thoughts about the future in photography?
You know, I just want everyone to feel welcome inside the circle of photography and as communicators. You know, no matter what your background, your race, your ethnicity, your, you know, gender identification, I think the more diversity, the better. And we need to create a business structure that invites everyone and supports everyone. So I think it's going to look differently. You know, that sort of long established pipeline of, you know, university into magazine or newspaper work is changing profoundly. And so,
what I hear you both saying, obviously there are economic challenges out there, but at the same time, does this generation of photographers have the ability to not wait for institutions to publish their work, to reach an audience in a direct way that has not existed historically?
I think definitely. I mean, if you look at something like the Journal, which was started by two photographers from Women Photograph, I think that's a wonderful example. Mm-hmm. I love what Photodemic is doing, which is a number of alumni, you know, from ICP, like Alexei Uranev, with Fred Richin, you know, their Dean Emeritus. And I think that you just see some wonderful things. And some of them, of course, are rooted in institutions, but just to be able to see something spring out of nothing. And look at what Photoville has done in the last 10 years. I mean, it's incredible. And the way that they've been able to pivot to this current condition that we're in, I don't know, I just really admire people's resourcefulness in being able to get the work out there.
Lynn, please go ahead.
Sorry, the thing about being a photographer is that you can't not do it. If it's your passion, if it's who you are and it is part of your identity, it is like an addiction, and you have to do it, and you will figure it out.
I have one final question for the two of you, and then we will promote what's coming up. How important is being outraged to your ability to keep going, to make change? Mm-hmm. The role of outrage in what you do.
You can answer that, Lynn.
Because I'm the one.
Yes, you are the one.
Yes, well, I think outrage is a critical aspect. You know, and that goes back to our relationship, because I can have the outrage and I can be just spinning right. with like some kind of emotional energy. Mm-hmm. But having someone like Elizabeth say, we need that to make sense.
Well, I'm happy to talk. Well, I just want to talk you down and channel it into something that's productive, right?
I don't want to be talked down. I want to use it. I want to use it.
Know. We're channeling it. We're channeling it.
Somebody talk it down.
Right.
So,
right.
yeah.
This conversation, I think, is a good illustration of the kind of balance one needs to be successful. And certainly you both have illustrated that. And I hope those photographers who have been listening will find a stable photo editor to help them through things. And those hopeful photo editors out there will find a photographer who's outraged enough to put in the time to do the work. You both have been very generous in all of the tips you've shared here. I want to let people know how to stay in touch with you. So coming up, a few things. You can stay in touch with Lynn through her Instagram here and also her website, lynnjohnson.photo.com. And Elizabeth, I don't know that, well, maybe I have the slide, but visualthinkingcollective.com, which you were one of the original founders of.
Along with Sarah Lean and Lauren Steele and Shannon Simon. So, and we're going to be giving, well, you're going to talk about that.
There's also a video online. If you look up the title of the show, Elizabeth?
Oh, it's called A Mother's Eye. And it is a project that I've been thinking about for many years, but I was very fortunate that Catchlight was able to help me sort of facilitate the first appearance of A Mother's Eye with 5 different photographers. And now in this installation, we have 8 different photographers who are all mothers photographing their children. And there's some really wonderful work. I don't know, do you want me to give the names of all the photographers?
You know what? I would encourage everybody to check out A Mother's Eye. Google it. You'll find it. You'll find the exhibition, or go to the Photoville exhibition page, which we may have put in the chat window. And if you're able, try to go see the show in person, or you can find out about information online. I think that does it.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, Tom, thank you so much to you and everyone on the team there at Leica. It's been great. So,
thank you both.
Great honor. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that.
We'll see you all next time.